Let me go across. In fact, joining us is our panel. We have Anil Antony, leader of the BJP. We have Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, former diplomat and member of the UNHRC. We also have leaders of the Congress, Lokesh Jindal and Kamruzzaman Choudhury. But Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, I want to ask you first, and let's just stay on these pictures. The world will be watching this one image of the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of India for quite a while, coming as it does at a juncture when we at least have three superpowers jostling with each other: America, Russia, China. What do you make, first of all, of these pictures? Ambassador Malhotra, you're on mute, sir. If you could please unmute.
Sorry. Thank you. Let me say at the outset that in form and substance, this state visit marks a new peak, a peak that has been achieved higher than any recent. It reflects really the tremendous importance that both our countries attach to our bilateral ties and the growing convergence of our interests. And that too, as you pointed out, in a period of flux, in a period of geopolitical churn. It is good to see that we are moving towards a closer alignment with US, but we are doing so while pursuing a multi-alignment policy and maintaining our strategic autonomy. That is the beauty of what is happening, I think, from an Indian point of view. It also shows that the USA views our rise very positively, and even more so against the backdrop of the growing challenge to its own dominance being posed by China. And given our own issues with China, I think it is natural that we partner more closely with each other. And so we are progressing in the right direction.
Now, all of these images, if anything, show that there is definitely an unequivocal acceptance that Prime Minister Modi is the one who is helming India's rise, from leveraging the deep cultural strength of the country through yoga, diaspora, and the gifts that he took for the US president to big-ticket business and defense deals. What stands out most in this state visit is the personal chemistry between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. Not only has Modi become the only PM to be invited to address a joint session of the US Congress twice, but pictures from the private dinner hosted earlier at the White House also spoke volumes, because it wasn't just about dinner niceties. A host of business leaders who met the PM over the last 2 days were also effusive in their enthusiasm, not just for India, but for its premier. Let's take a look one by one at what many of these people who met the Prime Minister said. Billionaire investor Ray Dalio said that Modi is a man whose time has come when India's time has come, and that the potential of India, let's take a look at what all of these people said, that he's an enormous reformer who has the ability and popularity to transform. Professor Nicholas Taleb commended India for its response to COVID. Nobel laureate Paul Romer declared that India can show the way to the world. Sanjay Malhotra of Micron Technology said that after his meeting, he's impressed with the Prime Minister's vision for India. And these are but a sample, because the last 2 days has seen a cross-section of academicians, artists, business heads. All have echoed the same sentiment: India's time is now. Contrast this for just a second with what was said about the same India just last month by one of its most prominent opposition faces, former Congress President Rahul Gandhi, from alleging the capture of institutions to declaring that free speech and space for engagement is over. No wonder then that today India's ruling party said that naysayers must watch all of these images coming to us from the White House. Mind you, it's not just business heads and heads of state who are acknowledging India's rise, because very often such praise is dismissed by saying, so what? They have a selfish interest. They're just trying to make money. They want India's moolah. This praise is also supplemented with regular approval ratings that show Prime Minister Modi as the most popular among all world leaders. He stays at the top in a popularity survey done by Morning Consult. He stays at the top with a 75% approval rating, followed by the heads of Switzerland, Mexico, and Australia. The simple question then is it sheer political sniping that fails to see real gains that India is making as a whole under Prime Minister Modi's stewardship. Let me take that across. Lokesh Jindal, Kamruzzaman Choudhury, Anil Antony, all with us, along with Ambassador Agrawal, who's also here with us. Ajay Malhotra, Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, who's here with us. Kamruzzaman Choudhury, can you deny what is very, very apparent, that you have the White House now saying you are an indispensable, you're an extremely important partner for the US?
Was that comment meant for Narendra Modi ji or the Prime Minister of India, Padmaja? I believe it was for the Prime Minister of India. We as a nation have progressed a lot. We became a superpower after the economic liberalization of 1991 carried out by the Congress regime out there. Now the whole world is taking note of India, not because of Narendra Modi ji post 2014, but India as a nation, as an economic superpower that we have become because of years of progressive policies the governments have made over the successive period of time. The credit, if at all, goes to all the previous governments till date. We can't deny that India has not progressed under Narendra Modi. But then the sort of what you call this, the praise that you are heaping on Narendra Modi, as if India is being recognized by the United States post 2014 only under Narendra Modi. Now, basic question comes that why is that so? The geopolitics and the business interest overshadow human rights issues, religious intolerance, press freedoms, internet access, and the targeting of civil society groups. This is not said by me. These are the 75 senators who had written a letter to Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America. And I read one more paragraph, Padmaja.
So just a second. Okay, so let Anil Antony answer that. Anil Antony, you are focusing on what Joe Biden is saying. Not focusing on what 75 senators, because obviously 75 senators outweigh the President of the United States. Not to mention all the other senators who are saying that this is absolute bunkum and we definitely are going to be a part of the joint address.
No, nobody can deny that.
Thank you.
Let Anil Antony respond, sir. I'm asking him your question only. Anil Antony.
But then...
Thank you. At this day, on this day, I would say this is one of the most, there is an echo.
All right, we'll just fix that in a second. Please go on.
Thank you. This, I would say, is one of the most historic days in Indian history as well as American history. My friend in the opposition did say that this is just another visit by a Prime Minister which we have seen in the past also. But when we are looking at the actualities of this particular visit, we will clearly see that that is not the case. When we are looking at the entire American history, Sri Narendra Modi ji is only the third global leader after Mr. Winston Churchill and Mr. Nelson Mandela to be greeted with a 21-gun salute. The other two were Nobel laureates also. Narendra Modi ji will only be the fifth global leader who will be addressing the US Congress twice. No other Indian Prime Minister, no other Indian leader had been given such an honor. And now these are all events that show the rising cloud of India and also the rising stature of the Prime Minister. Now, along with these events, I would also say that this is one of the most substantial events as far as any state visit of any Indian leader has happened in Indian history in terms of outcomes and in terms of actual effects. When we are looking at this particular trip, this particular visit, yesterday Honorable Prime Minister was speaking at the National Science Foundation where he said a couple of things in a very specific manner. The two of them were the two great democracies of India and the US. Both of us have certain strengths which are complementary, which in the current world, when it becomes collaborative, will be win-win situations for both India and the US and also for the rest of the world. He specifically mentioned that the United States is the world leader when it comes to high technologies.
Sure, but the Congress is asking, what about human rights violations? And they are also being flagged up.
Research and development. No, so this is what it is. So when India is rising, at this moment India is rising, the fastest growing economy, which the IMF says is the lone bright spot in the world in this turbulent times. In the last 2 days, Honorable Prime Minister met some of the most important people in the US, intellectuals, artists, entrepreneurs, tech titans. Everybody were excited to meet the Prime Minister. At the same time, look at the opposition, what they are doing. 2 weeks back, one of the leading opposition leaders, the former Congress President Rahul Gandhi, he went to the US, and as usual, he had his usual rant, where he was once again bad-mouthing everything that was happening in India. In between, he praised China a little bit also. And then he stressed on 2 points. One of them is there is a democratic recession in India, and then he says minorities are prosecuted. Then look at officially how the Americans responded. 2-3 days back, one of the official spokespersons of the White House, she had a press conference where she specifically said, we are very proud, and she was praising the vibrancy of Indian democracy. So this is the American response. This is the official American response.
Okay, you can choose to focus on the dark spots, but there is a very clear recognition, Lokesh Jindal, what India's real image to the world is. Lokesh Jindal, just a second, Lokesh Jindal.
Yes, good evening, Padmaja. I want to ask a question. Why is India's credit rating still BBB negative? Why is it that so much of brightness that the ruling party is claiming the credit rating has not improved? Secondly, with respect to US, let me also remind you of some.
You can choose to focus on the dark spots. It's literally like if somebody says.
Now this is a photograph of President Ronald Reagan and Rajiv Gandhi. So President Ronald Reagan over here is holding the umbrella, and he is considering it as a momentous meeting between Rajiv Gandhi and Ronald Reagan, the US president.
Okay.
So this outcome is the follow-up of a continuous process which could be traced back to Rajiv Gandhi when he initiated bilateral talks with US. Subsequently, subsequent prime ministers has carried forward this momentum, and this has brought us today. Giving only one person a credit for good bilateral ties between US and India is not fair, Padmaja.
Sir,
Secondly,
I'm not the one
there
giving
are
credit
important
at all.
issues.
I'm not giving the credit at all.
It is being glorified and exaggerated.
It was Ray Dalio who said that India's time has come and it's Prime Minister Modi whose time has come. These are the people saying it is not me.
India's time was always there. It's a civilization. It is strategically very important. It has, since 1947, it has maintained its strategic autonomy. With respect to foreign policy, it was Jawaharlal Nehru's foreign policy which laid down the basis on which the present Prime Minister also works upon.
Ambassador Malhotra, is this a gradual building up, or do you see any quantum change?
Well, there's definitely a certain excitement in the air, which may not have been there on earlier occasions. I have had the opportunity to be present at at the same venue, a previous visit, not a state visit, admittedly, but an official visit. And yes, you can see, I guess, the larger presence of the Indian community and the excitement that they bring to it certainly makes it feel like a different moment. But I think looking at the technologies being offered, and it may take some time to come in, but the fact that we have moved from a situation where we were being offered, those little kite kind of drones, now to the most, top of the class sort of the MQ-9 Reaper drones, it shows that there's a quantum change in our relationship. And as President Biden and others have said, it has become a defining relationship of the 21st century. And you can also see the chemistry that is there between the two leaders. Certainly, this has been there also between other Indian and American leaders. But in this case, we have to look at it in the context of what else is happening in the world and the desire by USA to cultivate us, and our belief that, yes, there is merit in being cultivated at this moment by America. So there's much that brings us together. And I think in both President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, you have very seasoned, very highly experienced politicians, and that is reflected in the way they conduct themselves in the statements they are making.
Okay, in fact, let's listen in again to the first remarks from the Prime Minister soon after his arrival at the White House today, underlining, and I want to show you all a picture, because it's this picture of him 30 years ago that he actually referred to when he said that 30 years ago I came to the White House, I stood on the outside, I was looking in, and today I have already made 2 visits, one for the private dinner yesterday and today for the meeting. Let's listen in to Prime Minister Modi.
राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, फर्स्ट लेडी डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन, डिस्टिंग्विश्ड गेस्ट्स, उमंग और उत्साह से भरे हुए इंडियन अमेरिकन मेरे प्यारे साथियों, आप सबको नमस्कार। सबसे पहले तो मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन के मित्रतापूर्ण स्वागत और दीर्घदृष्टिपूर्ण संबोधन के लिए उनका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। थैंक यू प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन फॉर योर फ्रेंडशिप। फ्रेंड्स, आज व्हाइट हाउस में शानदार स्वागत समारोह के एक प्रकार से ये भारत के 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का सम्मान है, 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का गौरव है। ये सम्मान अमेरिका में रहने वाले 4 मिलियन से अधिक भारतीय मूल के लोगों का भी सम्मान है। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का उनके प्रति हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। फ्रेंड्स, करीब 3 दशक पहले एक साधारण नागरिक के रूप में
Exactly 10 years ago, well, Mr. President, Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being here. Welcome back to the White House. Well, Mr. President, Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being here. Welcome back to the White House. Almost exactly 10 years ago, when I visited Mumbai as Vice President, I emphasized how important it was back to the White House. Almost exactly 10 years ago, when I visited Mumbai as Vice President, I emphasized how, well, Mr. President, Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being here. Welcome back to the White House. Almost exactly 10 years ago, when I visited Mumbai as Vice President, I emphasized how, well, Mr. President, Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being here. Welcome back to the White House. Almost exactly 10 years ago, when I visited Mumbai as Vice President, well, Mr. President, Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being here. Welcome back to the White House.
All right, the first images that are coming from the Oval Office. The meeting has just started between the Prime Minister and President Joe Biden. Michael Waltz, Congressman from Florida, joining us now, along with Executive Director of the Indian Century Roundtable, Salvatore Babonis. We also have with us Jeff Smith, Director of the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. Each one of them has a very special significance. Jeff Smith, of course, yesterday met with the Prime Minister. Mr. Babonis met with him in Australia during his visit there. And Congressman Waltz was the one who wrote the letter to ask for the Prime Minister to address the joint session of the Congress. So I'll naturally start with you, Congressman Waltz. Why? Why did you want Prime Minister Modi to address a joint session again?
Well, I'm proud to serve as the Republican chair of the U.S.-India caucus in the House of Representatives. And the bottom line is, I believe the U.S.-India relationship is the most vital relationship in the 21st century. We have so many ties diplomatically, economically, in technology, in space, in our energy sector, in renewables, and of course, militarily. And I look forward to that partnership across all of those sectors growing, and even more broadly into things like the Quad partnership with Japan and with Australia as well. So I am thrilled to have the Prime Minister here. I point out to all of my constituents that there are over 200,000 American jobs from the Indian tech sector alone, with an average salary of over $100,000. There is more business and trade between these two countries than the economies of half of our states in the United States. So there's tremendous upside and growth. And to have the oldest democracy in the world with the largest democracy in the world is really just, I think, a tremendous day for both our countries and the world.
Tell me this, there are many, all right, again the live images that we are getting when they were just walking into the Oval Office. Let's try and listen in for just a second.
और प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जिनके बीच इस वक्त वार्ता जारी है, और जैसा प्रधानमंत्री ने भी कहा कि विभिन्न आपसी, द्विपक्षीय, क्षेत्रीय और वैश्विक मुद्दों पर दोनों नेता आपस में बातचीत करेंगे, चर्चा करेंगे, और उसके बाद क्या कुछ निकलकर सामने आ रहा है वो एक संयुक्त साझा बयान में हमारे सामने होगा।
व्हाइट हाउस के गलियारे में दोनों नेताओं का टहलते हुए तस्वीरें, ममता, ये हम सब भारतीयों को बहुत अच्छी लगेंगी। और जिस बात का जिक्र जनरल अस्थाना साहब कर रहे थे, कुछ लोगों को शायद कुछ मुल्कों में कहीं दिक्कत भी लगेगी कि साहब ये दोस्ती किस तरह से आगे बढ़ रही है, लेकिन निश्चित तौर से प्रधानमंत्री मोदी और
Congressman Walz, there are many controversies also on the side where you have some congresswomen who have said that they are going to be sitting out of the address because they have concerns about the democratic backsliding in India. What do you say to them? They are your colleagues.
Well, I would refer those members of Congress to the old adage that we will always strive within democracies, within our own democracy, to be what we call a more perfect union. We certainly have our flaws. Those need to be addressed. I hope that they are discussed in a very frank and candid way. And you can be friends, allies, partners, and still have difficult conversations. But at the end of the day, I think in the broad scope of this partnership, this is something that we should all be engaged, Republican and Democrat, have those conversations, move the relationship forward. And when you look at it compared to what Russia is doing in Ukraine with its war crimes, the human rights and genocide abuses that are happening in China, I think this is, again, this is a partnership for the future.
In fact, perhaps most of those people would have been answered by the President of the United States himself. Let's actually play out to you an excerpt of what he said today when he spoke very clearly about core principles like equity under the law, freedom of expression, and religious pluralism. Listen in.
And as democracies, we can better tap into the full talent of all of our people and attract investments as true and trusted partners as leading nations, with our greatest export being the power of our example. Equity under the law, freedom of expression, religious pluralism, and diversity of our people. These core principles have endured and evolved even as they have faced challenges throughout each of our nation's histories, and will fuel our strength, depth, and future.
Jeff Smith, will this be enough to quell the politics around the issue of why Mr. Modi has been invited, how certain issues have not been addressed before making him a state guest?
Well, I think the politics surrounding these questions will continue. There's always politics surrounding these questions, but I do think that the Biden administration has taken the correct approach. And I would also refer you to remarks by Jake Sullivan in the past few days, in which he essentially said that challenges related to Indian democracy need to be settled by Indians inside of India. It is not the place of the United States to try to mold or shape Indian democracy in a certain way or intervene on behalf of liberalism. These are issues to be settled by Indians inside of India. And I largely agree with that approach. I think the Biden administration has rejected calls from the left to take a more interventionist, activist approach, because I think they realize that ultimately that would be counterproductive, would not result in the types of things these activists want to see, would more likely end up causing estrangement in India-U.S. relations and do very little to advance the cause that they, purport to be advocating for. And so, credit where credit is due. I think the Biden administration has handled this issue correctly, but I do expect the politics and the narratives to continue.
As an aside, we all love to be a fly on the wall, but since we weren't, would you care to share with us what was it that your conversation with the Prime Minister yesterday consisted of?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you the entire conversation. No, what I'll mention is that it was very clear from our discussion that democracy and democratic values are something that are very important to the Prime Minister. He went out of his way to bring up these topics on multiple occasions. You could tell that he was earnest, that he truly believes that democracy is a shared value between the United States and India, and that he's proud of India's democratic traditions, and I believe he should be proud of those traditions. India is a remarkable democracy. All of these op-eds that we've been seeing in the past few months and years about the death of Indian democracy are, in my perspective, entirely misplaced. India is more democratic, arguably, than it's ever been. What the sort of left wing in the U.S. is debating is whether India is becoming less westernly liberal, not whether India is becoming more democratic. India has free and fair elections. India is sort of an over 80% Hindu population. It shouldn't be surprising to anybody that India is more emphatically embracing its Hinduness. That is a function of democracy. That is a byproduct of democracy. It is Western liberalism that seems to be the attraction of this debate in the West, but that too often is being confused with the death of Indian democracy, when that's frankly not the case. If anything, India is becoming more democratic.
Can I please again pause you for a second, because I think there is a little bit of a conversation that we are privy to between the two heads of state. Let's listen in.
बहुत अच्छे शुभचिंतक रहे, और जब भी आपको जहां भी अवसर मिला है, आप हमेशा भारत के बहुत अच्छे शुभचिंतक रहे, और जब भी आपको जहां भी अवसर मिला है, आप हमेशा भारत के बहुत अच्छे शुभचिंतक रहे.
You've always wished the best for India. That's what the opening comments from the Prime Minister were. And you also have engaged with exactly the same theme, Mr. Babones, what Jeff Smith was talking about, this entire interpretation of democracy, especially by people who call themselves ironically liberals, and then liberally interpret what secularism and democracy is all about. It's hardly surprising that it's coming up during the Prime Minister's US visit as well, from politicians, no less.
No, look, I'd like to invite Representative Walsh and his team to reach out to me, because ironically, both Jeff and Jim, with all due respect, have bought into both the activist narrative that India has become illiberal and the Hindu nationalist response, which is that, well, India doesn't have to be liberal. In fact, we have lots of good data on Indian democracy and on liberalism in India. We find that India is, in fact, a highly liberal democracy. It'll shock American readers or American listeners to hear that, in fact, Muslim and Christian minority members in India report dramatically less discrimination than do African Americans, Asian Americans, or Hispanic Americans. And that's on the same survey conducted by the Pew Research Center. It's a very high quality, it's an extraordinary survey we have for data on India. It's simply not true that India has, is a democracy, but has somehow strayed away from liberalism. This narrative that that's okay because everyone doesn't have to be liberal, it's simply false. For example, press freedom. We constantly hear that reporters are being attacked in India. Yet, in fact, the rate of reporter killings, the rate of journalist killings in India is lower than in the United States. That's a mind-blowing fact that people in America simply need to be made aware of, that India has not become an illiberal democracy. That's simply an activist narrative. And the idea that it's okay if India is an illiberal democracy is a Hindu nationalist narrative. Neither of those narratives are correct. India is very much a liberal democracy.
Congressman Waltz, what do you think are the real issues that should be discussed at such a critical juncture? You, for example, what are the 3 things that you would want to address if and when you meet the Prime Minister?
Sure. We'll see him this afternoon when he comes for his joint address in Congress. Obviously, continued economic integration and what we can do to remove barriers between the 2 countries. It's interesting to me that the premise for the last 20 years with our relationship with China was that capitalism would change China politically, that further coupling of our economies would make China a responsible partner. That's proven to be false. But I think that is very real potential to prove to be true when it comes to the U.S.-India relationship. I believe that the more our economies integrate, whether it's clean U.S. natural gas, whether it's the investments in Indian renewables, there is a big push here to decouple, to pull away our economy and supply chains from Chinese manufacturing. Of course, we want them to come home to the United States, but if that doesn't make sense, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, solar panels, other types of manufacturing, let's work together to have those supply chains emerge from India. And then finally, we do have to acknowledge the dragon in the room, so to speak, and that is the increasing aggressiveness, belligerence, and hostility that's emanating from the Chinese Communist Party. India made a bold stand to ban many apps and other types of Chinese tech that are surveilling the Indian population and collecting data. We can learn from that in the United States and how to take that tough stand. Finally, the third thing would be space. And that truly is the new frontier, and I believe there's tremendous amounts of cooperation between our commercial space industry that will be buttressed by AI, and that will be supported by educational exchanges in STEM. So there's almost too many things and positive things to talk about in the relationship, but I'll take that those things just to name a few.
It's funny you mentioned the ban on Chinese apps as a significant move by India, because back home it was called nothing more than window dressing. Some even said it was a stunt. Congressman Waltz, really appreciate you as joining us. Jeff Smith, do you think that India will successfully be able to stave off efforts? Because a number of American commentators that we've spoken to over the last 2 days have said that it would be in India's interest to slowly distance itself from Russia, given Russia's tango with China. Will India successfully be able to keep all of these demands at an arm's length?
Well, I think the U.S. has not been excessively demanding of India when it comes to Russia. If you separate what's happening in the op-ed pages and the chattering classes from what actual U.S. government policy is, there's quite a difference there. The U.S. government has not sanctioned India for purchasing Russian oil, has not demanded that India cease purchases of Russian military hardware. I think there is an understanding among actual experts and government officials that this is a relationship that goes back many decades to a period of time when the U.S. was not willing to be a defense partner of choice for India. And while many people are uncomfortable with the relationship. They also recognize the reality that the United States cannot bully or coerce India into severing its ties with Russia. There are simply too many dependencies. The relationship goes back far too long. And what we do expect is likely is that over time, India will diversify its relationships, including its defense and energy relationships. That's already begun to happen. We've been seeing India move toward the US, toward European defense suppliers for some time. We've seen as Russia and China have grown closer, that has caused some discomfort in New Delhi. And so I think, people in the know believe that over the long term, India and Russia are likely to grow farther apart on their own. And it does the US little good to try to force ourselves in and try to drive a wedge between those countries, because that's unlikely to succeed, frankly. And because India prizes its independence and its strategic autonomy, and it's not going to take dictates from the United States or others on who it can or can't do external engagements with.
Well, it's become amply clear, India definitely no pushover. There's a conversation we can carry on for much, much longer. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time. Been very revelatory speaking to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us with your perspective. Thanks for watching.